On this video we will continue with various questions on Torah topics, and please feel free to stop, pause the video when you want to think about an answer before you hear my answer. And as I mentioned before, this is the second part of the series, and as I mentioned before, we're going to sometimes bring an answer that might be not the only possible answer. So my next question is, where in the Chumash do we have names of people that can turn into one another by switching the order of letters, meaning two names that have the same letters but in different order? I'm asking specifically about the Chumash, the 5 books of Moshe. You may want to pause here and think a little bit. So the answer that I can give you, there may be other examples, but something that occurred to me was Yosef and Vovsi. There is a person named Vovsi, he's actually one of the fathers of someone who was sent as spies in the beginning of Parshat Shelach Lecha. And the letters of Vovsi are exactly the same as the letters of Yosef. So here's an interesting question. Military operations are often planned at the time when the enemy changes guards. And the reason for this is obvious, because when the new guards come in, they usually didn't get accustomed yet to the quietness, to the darkness, and the reaction is not as immediate. They're not as alert. In many cases at night, they didn't sleep enough. They were woken up sometime in the middle of the night, and now they have to stand and guard the place. So the best time to start a military operation that you wouldn't be noticed immediately is exactly when the new guards just came in, just started their time to guard, their watch, what is called. So my question to you is, where in Tanakh do we find a military operation that actually started exactly when the guards were changed? And the Tanakh actually emphasizes that this was the time when the military operation started. The answer is in the story of Gidon in Shoftim in the 7th chapter. It says that he attacked the Midianites in the middle watch. And if you look in the commentary of Malbim, he actually emphasizes that this was the reason he did that, in order to catch the new watch of guards off guard. Sorry for the pun. Question: about which biblical book is there the greatest uncertainty in traditional sources with regards to its time of composition? Meaning, which book of Tanakh, of 24 books of Tanakh, are there different opinions ranging among the rabbis exactly when the author of this book lived and the book was written? There's the greatest uncertainty in terms of time. The answer is it's the book of Eov. Now, there are some prophets indeed that we don't know exactly when they lived, and there are different opinions. For example, Prophet Yoel, he is one of the 12 smaller prophets, and there are different opinions exactly when he lived. There are some midrashim that make him extremely early, actually, that suppose that he was son of Shmuel. That would make him the earliest of the 12 prophets of the Trei Asar. But there are other midrashim that say that he was in much later time, closer to the end of the First Temple period. At any rate, there is quite a bit of uncertainty. But the greatest uncertainty is with regards to the book of Eov. There is a sugya, there is a place in the Talmud in Masechet Bava Batra which discusses how we write prophets, in what order we write them, and among other things it discusses which prophet was written when and who was the author. And one opinion is that Eov himself was very early. There's an opinion that he was in the times of forefathers, and that the book itself was written by Moshe. And there are opinions that suppose that Eov was actually in the times of Second Temple, and presumably the author is then unknown who wrote the book of Eov. There are even opinions in the Babylonian Talmud that Eov never existed, and the whole story is a mashal. It's a parable to teach us how divine ways sometimes seem unfair, and we don't know why Hashem punishes people. In fact, that's the main purpose of the book of Eov. purpose of the book is clear. The answer is not clear. The purpose of the book is obviously, as anybody who would read it, in the very first chapters it becomes clear what the book is about. It says that Eov was a very, very righteous man in every respect, and yet he lost everything, and he was suffering tremendously. And then the whole book is discussion between him and his friends. Why is he suffering? What did he do wrong? Or if he didn't do wrong, why then Hashem is punishing him? And the answer seems to be that we simply don't know divine ways, which is what the Talmud concludes too. There's no way to know why Hashem makes somebody suffer in this world. There are some Mikubalim who claim that the answer is actually given to Eov in the 33rd chapter, when one of his friends, someone named Elihu, don't mistake him for Eliyahu, it's somebody else. So this friend of his tells him that the reason he's suffering apparently is because of his sins in a different life, in a different reincarnation. It doesn't say that explicitly, but that's at least how Mikubalim, how the mystics understand it. The Zohar and Ramban and Rabbeinu Bachia and others understand that that was the answer. But it seems further from the book that the answer was never given, because what does Hashem actually answer Eov? At the end of the book, it's Hashem who tells Eov, and what does he say? He basically says, it's my world, I do things that you don't understand. Where were you when I created the world, Hashem says. And according to the Gra, Hashem revealed to him 48 out of 50 gates of understanding, Sharei Binah, at that point, but not everything a human can know. So the idea is, just like the Talmud in Masechet Brachot concludes, that we do not know of Hashem's ways fully. We could try to sometimes understand. Certainly when punishments happen, it's a good idea to try to see what we could fix and how we could do tshuva and how we could become better. But ultimately, especially on an individual level, not on societal level, the whole city or whole country suffering, but when it's individuals, we don't really know. It could have to do with Gilgul, it could have something to do with something else. There is such a thing as suffering out of love, whatever that means. So the idea is that the question is as old as the world, but the answer is not given. This book does not conclude with a particular answer. So when did Eov live? Could be he was in the times of forefathers. There is one opinion that he was born at the time we entered Egypt and died at the time our ancestors left Egypt. There are opinions that he was even earlier than that. There are opinions that he married Dinah, the daughter of Yaakov. So he was very early according to this. And there are opinions that he lived as late as the Second Temple. And at last there are opinions that he never lived, and the whole book is a mashal to show the idea of why people would suffer. Or there is a Yerushalmi, a Jerusalem Talmud, that has slightly different opinion, that Eov himself existed. There was a man like that, but the story never happened. Again, the idea is that the story is a mashal. So we have all kinds of ideas when Eov lived, total uncertainty, and we have all, or even if he lived at all, and we have a total uncertainty, of course, of who wrote this book. Obviously, if the book is talking about a man who lived in the Second Temple, it does not seem to be that this opinion holds that Moshe wrote that book, because Moshe was not writing it in prophetic way in what will happen in the future. This book is talking about what happened already. So the one who says that Eov lived in the Second Temple would have to say that it was written probably by one of the latest prophets, maybe Haggai, Zechariah, or Malachi, or someone else who we don't know. Or it's possible that, of course, the statements of Chazal when they say that he lived in the Second Temple are not to be taken literally, that they don't really mean that Eov lived in the Second Temple, but they mean that there were other people in the Second Temple that they knew who were like Eov, who also suffered for nothing. There is an explanation like that too. There are all kinds of explanations already to the Talmud, what the Chazal, what our sages meant when they said that maybe he lived in the Second Temple, his Beit Midrash was in Tiberia. Maybe it's Rabbi Yochanan, hinting to Rabbi Yochanan that he's a type of Eov. It's not talking about Eov himself. Then again, the statement that Eov never existed, according to one opinion, also could be not taken literally. Apparently the Gra does not take it literally. So there are all kinds of opinions. But for one thing for sure, it seems that there is a great uncertainty of when this book was written. Greater uncertainty than any other book in the Torah, in the Tanakh. Next question. Which living being is cited as an example of a hard worker in the book of Proverbs and in the world literature? So the answer is ant. Somehow ant always reminded people of like a hard-working individual. There are, for instance, Russian proverbs about it and all kinds of other proverbs. And of course, lehavdil, in the book of Mishlei, It tells the lazy man to learn from ants. And here's the opposite question. Which animal is commonly known in all kinds of proverbs in the world? And even the Talmud tells us that there are proverbs about this animal. However, the book of Proverbs does not mention this animal even once. You'd expect this animal to be in the book of Proverbs probably a few times, and somehow it's just not mentioned there. It is mentioned in Tanakh, this animal, and like I said, it's an animal that's usually used for all kinds of parables and proverbs and stories and anecdotes, but it happens to be that the book of Mishlei does not mention it. The answer is fox. Fox is mentioned in Shir HaShirim and in Shoftim, but it's not mentioned in the book of Mishlei. Question: what's the maximal number of words in the Chumash that start with the same letter? So this is something that probably most people don't know. It's just a curious fact, I guess. And that is that when you talk about Vav as the letter, that's the most common letter to start a word with, because it means and. And this and this. Of course, we know that in Hebrew the word and is appended to the next word. It's not a separate word like in English or Russian or other languages. So Hebrew in general loves kitzur, loves short, making everything shorter as possible. So a lot of times the words, prepositions, and other words that in other languages are separate, in Hebrew become part of the word, suffixes and prefixes of the word. So and is just a prefix to the next word. So therefore a lot of words start with Vav, and therefore you could expect to have a lot of words in a row sometimes starting with Vav. There's an interesting feature, for instance, of the book of Ruth, that almost all psukim, almost every sentence starts with a Vav. There's only 8 exclusions in the entire book of Ruth. So anyway, so there's 8 letters in a row that start with Vav in Bamidbar 32:3 and in Dvarim 16:4. And also if you count the words from different psukim, then in Bereshit 24:35, the last 7 words plus the first word of the next pasuk, it's also 8 words that start with a Vav. Now, if we don't consider Vav, if we exclude Vav, then the maximal number of words that start with the same letter is 6. And that is Aleph in 2 places, in Bereshit 42:21 and in Shemot 3:6. There's 6 words in a row that start with an Aleph, interestingly. So here is a curious riddle. A riddle is in Hebrew Chidah. So most people heard of one Chidah that's mentioned in Tanakh, and that is Chidah of Shimshon. Shimshon made a riddle to Plishtim, and once they solved that riddle through a tricky way, he made it look like he's so angry at them, so he killed many of them. Shimshon, of course, led a kind of one-man rebellion, partisan war against Plishtim. In his time, the Jewish people were not zocheh, they were not worthy to fight a real war and win. But he knew from the prophecy, from blessing of Yaakov to his tribe, that Dan will be a kind of snake on the way to fight the horse and the rider. So he understood it's hinting to partisan war. So Shimshon, all his life, tried to do the best he can to start saving the Jewish people, which was predicted to his mother. He was born in a special way, already predicted by an angel, and he was told, his mother was told that his son will begin to save the Jewish people from Plishtim. So he's not going to have a full victory, but he will make things easier. And he kind of started what later, of course, in times of Shmuel, that was very, very soon afterwards, and then later on in the times of Shaul and in the times of David, the Jewish people won finally and became stronger, and most importantly got the divine protection against Plishtim. But in the times of Shimshon, they didn't deserve yet to be fully saved, so Shimshon had to wage a war that would look like it's his personal battle. It's not like he is waging for the Jewish people, because if the Plishtim would understand that, they would just kill Jews and take them hostage and say, you Shimshon, if you continue killing any of us, we'll just kill for every Plishti, we'll kill 1,000 Jews or something like that. So therefore he had to do very, very interesting, tricky thing he had to do here. He had to behave as if he is one of them, he almost like broke up with the Jewish people. He married one of their women. Rambam holds that he converted her. Maybe it's possible that that's what happened. But at any rate, his desire was like a Jewish spy today. He would be a good example, like that Sofrim brings, of a spy today. A lot of times the Israeli spies behave like Arabs, marry Arab women, and they have to live for a certain amount of time of their lives as if they're Arabs in order to save the state of Israel. There's no other way really in today's day and age, especially with Israel surrounded by enemies, without having spies. So basically Shimshon was a dugma, was an example of a Jewish spy of that time, and he single-handedly fought Plishtim, and at the same time he seemed like one of theirs. So one of his first excuses on how to start a fight was this chidah that he made. He asked them a certain tricky question that they would have never known. It was impossible really to answer it. And they pushed his wife, who was one of theirs, who was a Philistinian herself, to make her husband reveal the answer. And afterwards, when they told him the answer, he made it look like he's getting very angry that they got it through his wife, and he killed many Plishtim. So that's the chidah that's well known. There is one other chidah that's in Tanakh that's not well known. What is it? The answer is the prophet Yecheskel uses exactly the same word, chidah, in chapter 17. He talks about two eagles, one of which is Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babel, of Babylonia, the other one is Pharaoh of Egypt. So the Jewish people had to be basically was stuck between two great powers, each of which was definitely antagonistic to them, and ultimately sometimes they would rely on one against the other, and in the end our temple was destroyed and we were exiled. So at any rate, there is a chidah there with regards to two eagles. The prophet himself, this, by the way, explains what the words of the chidah are hinting to. Question: what's the shortest word in the Torah? The answer is there is a letter Hey in Ha'azinu in the 6th pasuk of 32nd chapter of Dvarim, where it says Ha la Hashem tigmilu zot. So Ha there is written as a separate word. It's the only place in the Torah that's a separate word. Is just one letter, because usually, like I said, letters are appended to small words of one letter are appended to the next word, like Vav, for instance. But this is one example of a word with just one letter. And at last I want to ask one more question on this video, and we'll continue with Hashem's help in the future with more videos on this topic. So, which Jewish sage had a name that's a riddle? The answer is chidah. Chidah is not just the word for a riddle. There is a name of the sage, the first letters of the name, it's an acronym. Chaim Yosef David Azulai was a tremendous Sephardic Gaon who knew he wrote on all kinds of topics. He was an extremely prolific writer. He wrote basically an encyclopedia of sorts. And his opinions ranged from halacha to agadah to kabbalah, and he traveled a lot and looked at manuscripts, had tremendous memory, probably photographic memory. There were two great Sephardi sages who were specifically working like an encyclopedia, writing on all kinds of topics in an encyclopedic way. One was, of course, Zdei Chemed, who lived, by the way, in Crimea, part of his life, but he was from Eretz Israel. And the other was Chidah. So his name sounds like the word riddle, even though Chidah is spelled, of course, the riddle with a He at the end, whereas Chidah the sage is spelled with an Aleph at the end. The last name of the sage was Azulai, very important Sephardic last name. And on this we end our second lecture on Torah riddles. Please post your comments, or if you like the video, press like.